Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ask Concussion Doc, episode 90. I'm pretty sure it's 90.
Oh, wow.
That's good. That's good. On today's episode, we have Nazeeg. How do you say your last name?
Haneshian.
Haneshian.
There you go.
at Invisible Scar on Instagram, and she is also a former and sometimes current patient of mine. I met Nazeeg 2 years ago, almost to the day, when
right.
she came to my clinic for treatment of a concussion that she suffered 6 years earlier. And she reached out to me last week and said that she had some questions from some of her followers on her channel about what we did for her in terms of treatment. And I said, I think it'd be probably a good idea if we just did it live together and just talked about your case, and that way we can kind of break down what we did in terms of the case, what symptoms she had, and how we kind of approach that, and we can hear it from her side and from my side. And I think that would be a cool thing to do. So welcome everybody to this. Nazeeg, off over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad we're doing a live session together. For my followers, I often talk about Concussion Doc and often referred to him as the hero who kind of changed everything for me after 6 years of suffering. So I suffered a concussion in July of 2012, had 6 years of basically every single symptom of concussion, post-concussion syndrome that came with that. I met or found out about Concussion Doc through my sister, who discovered him on Instagram, and saw him 2 years ago now, and we were just talking about it. It was May 15th was my first appointment with him in 2018, and May 24 is my favorite day because that's the day I got my first treatment that did wonders for me. So concussion, Dr. Haneshian has been studying concussions extensively, and I believe he's one of the doctors that's got the most up-to-date knowledge of concussions and the treatment methods for it. So I'm happy to have everybody here. I've had a lot of questions over the past few months, especially on what the treatment method was for me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Sweet. The other cool thing is, just for those listening on the podcast, the recording date of this is May 20th, 2020. So we're just over 2 years to the date from her first visit, and we're approaching the anniversary or the biennial or whatever it is for the for the first treatment. The other cool thing we have today is I actually have her actual medical file up in front of me for the stuff that we did and her history and what her symptom scores were and what the dates were, so we can start to actually create a bit of a timeline for how things went down with her case. So why don't we start just with your history, what happened, how did you get your injury, and then what was the journey between that to mine? Because I'm sure it resonates with a lot of concussion patients that are watching this right now or listening to this on the podcast or watching on YouTube, is that they probably went through similar journeys and they're probably having similar struggles. And so why don't you tell us your story in your own words, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I went on a volunteer trip. I was in my third year of university in 2012. So I wanted to go abroad and volunteer for a month. So on the second night of my trip, I fainted in the middle of the night. When I fainted, I hit my head on a corner of a marble slab, which at the time resulted in microskull fracturing. I had a bit of brain bruising as well. And it completely shifted everything. I mean, for the first week, I wasn't aware that it was a concussion. I kind of tried to go about everything. I knew my headache was very bad. I was very disoriented. I constantly walked into walls and constantly walked into the doorway of the car. So I knew something was wrong. A week later, when I got medical attention, I was diagnosed with a concussion, and immediately there, I was put on bed rest. I wasn't able to fly back until 3 weeks after. When I returned back to Canada, when I was still able to fly, I went straight to the emergency where I was officially diagnosed with a concussion. and got a lot of the examinations. And those examinations included an MRI and a CAT scan, which thankfully came out clear at the time, but I was still diagnosed with a severe concussion. So to kind of fast forward in terms of that, I was put on bed rest for 8 months. And it was a very strict bed rest. It was I was basically put in a dark room, curtains closed, complete darkness, no stimulation to the brain. So it was limitations even of socializing to 1.5 hours a day, no reading, no movies, obviously no physical activity, to a point where the only time I would do any kind of activity was going to visit my doctor. So initially I was visiting my doctor about once a week, and it was a sports medical specialist, sports medical medicine specialist. So he was at the time the person locally that knew of concussions. I did a bit of treatment for chiropractics, but that didn't really continue on. It wasn't. There wasn't a lot of encouragement from the medical field in that sense. I saw 3 or 4 different neurologists. I probably saw about 4 or 5 different family physicians just for different opinions. And I think one of the things that I constantly remember and I look back on, which was one of the most frustrating and discouraging parts of the recovery, it was constantly, this is your condition, learn to deal with it. This is permanent, learn to deal with it. As a person, as somebody in their young early 20s, it was very difficult. I was supposed to be going into my 4th year of university. Obviously, that never happened. I wasn't able to graduate with my class. I had a lot of limitations. In the first year, I think especially was quite difficult emotionally, as much as it was physically. So in terms of the physical aspect of it, though, I had every single symptom. I had the blurred vision, the throbbing headache, which felt like a migraine that I went to sleep with and I woke up with every day. Disorientation was very real for me. I thought I was okay all the time, but I would walk into walls, I would walk into things, I would always hit my head on the door going into the car, even though I would see it. I had light and noise sensitivity, so when people spoke to me, I felt like they were screaming in my ear. I was with sunglasses all the time, and sometimes I'd leave the house and not have them and just kind of randomly buy a $5, $10 pair just to put something on. So a lot of those symptoms were a struggle to live with, and I find that it was difficult. I built, I think, a higher pain tolerance for it, but they never really left my side. And to navigate the experience over 6 years, so to kind of generalize that, all of that, it was constantly repeated that, oh, you're not doing bed rest well enough. You are exerting, therefore you are worsening your symptoms. So if I would go into the weekly checkups, they'd say, did you look at your screen at all? Or did you do something that you think would have stimulated your brain to impact that? Which was difficult. I think that the doctors that I saw at the time, maybe that's the extent of their knowledge in concussions, but I don't think that they completely understood the emotional impact or the mental health impact of doing all that, to completely take somebody who's been so active and isolate them in that kind of area. That was very difficult. I look back in hindsight and realize just how difficult that experience was for me. I guess to fast forward, when I got to the 5-year mark, especially in 2017, I incurred my second concussion, which was probably more difficult for me to accept than the first, because I thought every kind of improvement that I had beforehand, it just took me back. That was kind of the year where a lot of different things changed in my personal life as well. In 2018, my sister, actually, I just want to note that my sister throughout this experience was constantly researching alongside my parents, but she was completely determined all the time to find an answer. She wasn't convinced that this was it. So she found Concussion Doc on Instagram, and I always say this to my followers because I think it's so important to realize that you find care in different ways, and you find them when you least expect them. So we found Concussion Doc on Instagram, and she tried to convince me for a few weeks, so we need to make an appointment with Concussion Doc, and I was opposed to it, not because of anything else, other than I just did not want to hear the word saying like, this is it, there's nothing else we can do for you, that I had heard for so long. But I guess going fast forward through the 6 year experience, it was filled with many struggles. It was filled with a lot of pain, obviously physical pain, a lot of emotional impact as well. But I kind of leave it back to, I'll get back to you, Kim, because you can talk a bit more about your approach. But the reason why I went to Dr. Marshall after was because of the different approach. And when we did the research about the different methods of treatment, it was completely different than every single doctor we had seen before, which brings us to May 15th in 2018. Which would have been earlier, but
yeah. She just told me before we went live, because we were looking, I was just kind of quickly looking at her file, and I was like, oh, May 15th. And she said, yeah, it's supposed to be earlier, but she decided to call and not tell her sister and just cancel before she came in to see me. So, and then her sister found out, I guess, and forced her to come and brought her.
Yeah, my sister made sure she drove me and brought me in.
Yeah. So I saw both you guys that day.
That's right.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that story is probably not unlike many of the people that listen to this podcast and many of the people that are watching us live right now. It's the same thing, right? Hearing, time after time after time just to rest. And if rest isn't working, just rest more. And it just doesn't seem to do the trick. And so, in the defense of some of the healthcare professionals you probably saw at the time, like back in 2012, that was the standard of care. We were telling people to rest, and that was the thing. But there was starting to be some emerging evidence coming out that exercise could be of benefit for people suffering from longer standing symptoms. And so anyone who is keeping up with that literature probably would have noticed even at that time. I founded Complete Concussion Management in 2013. So basically right around the time you were probably looking is when we first opened our first, we had 6 or 7 clinics that started up with us. And we were doing treadmill testing as one of our cornerstones right away. So exercise was a big thing at that point, but we were on the cutting edge of that. But I mean, how many people listening to this right now, are just resonating with your story? It's there's probably a tremendous amount of people, and there's probably a ton of people that have given up hope, just as you were kind of verging on, at that time. So I think it's important for you to continue to share your story, and I'm so glad you've done that on Instagram, and shared it from a more recovery standpoint, and showing people that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Because I find a lot of people on Instagram in the concussion recovery space, it's always so negative. It's always that there is this is the way it is kind of thing. But I think that what your channel does is show the hope side and the upside. So I think it's good. So if any people are not following Nazeeg at Invisible Scar, you probably should, because it's motivational, but in a way of recovery and not turmoil. So anyway, let's go on with your case, and let's talk about my approach to things and the way that we do the things that we do. So the first thing I want to do, I'll pull up your assessment here, and this is dated May 15th, 2018, and this was 2,127 days after your initial concussion. So
that's how long I was.
that's a lot of days. So 2,127 days had passed before you found your way to me. Fainted, hit your head on a corner of a marble slab, all the things you talked about, trying to go back to school. You were in university at the time, undergrad?
I went back to complete my undergrad in 2013 and graduated in 2014. So I went back a year later, but I took a break.
Okay.
I didn't start my master's until after after my recovery.
Yeah. Okay, so she had no real red flags. The initial symptoms that she reported at the time of the injury were balance problems, blurred vision, confusion, fogginess, headache, and nauseousness. Typical. Those are probably some of the most common symptoms that we see. And then the symptoms that she experienced when she came to see me, I'll just go through the most severe ones. So she had headache, pressure in the head, interestingly, 0 neck pain. Her neck pain score was 0 to 6. And what we'll see as we go through this is actually treatment of her neck was one of the most helpful things. And so that's something that I try to get across to people as well, is that the symptoms of concussion and the symptoms of whiplash are identical. And a lot of times patients with whiplash will have visual disturbances and dizziness and all these symptoms that they will assume is something with their brain. But in reality, it's actually it's actually a neck issue. But most of the time, people relate neck-related problems to having neck pain, but she reported a neck pain of 0. So let's just keep that in mind. So no neck pain at all. Headache, pressure in the head, dizziness. Her blurred vision was a 6 out of 6. So blurred vision was a big one. So keep that one in mind.
That was a big struggle.
Yeah, keep that in mind, as well as the vision was huge, 6 out of 6. She had been to the optometrist. Everything with her glasses was fine. She'd had everything checked out in terms of her visual function, and it was all normal. Sensitivity to noise was a 5 out of 6. Feeling slowed down was a 4 out of 6. Fogginess was a 5 out of 6. Not feeling right or not feeling like herself was a 5 out of 6. Fatigue or low energy, she rated as a 4 out of 6. Confusion, 3 out of 6. More emotional, irritable, sadness were all 4 out of 6. Nervous or anxious was a 3 out of 6. And her total symptom severity, so the total number of symptoms, was 20 out of a possible 22. And her total symptom severity score was 68 out of 132. So quite a significant score in terms of severity. So 132 is the maximum that you can score. She had a 68, which is generally high. As soon as I see something over 40, I start to realize that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's not going to be an easy case. Neurological examination was completely normal. And I think this is where a lot of healthcare professionals go wrong, is that they assume that concussion is a neurological injury, so we're going to send you to the neurologist. Most neurologists are looking for overt neurological dysfunction, but most concussion patients don't have overt neurological dysfunction. So her entire neurological exam was completely normal, unremarkable. Cranial nerve, cerebellar, upper limb neuro, pronator drifts, all that stuff was completely normal. She had good ocular motor tracking, good convergence of her eyes. So there was nothing neurological going on when I first assessed her. Typically, what we do on our first visit is we do this history, we do a neurological examination, and then we start with patient education. And then we provide a bit of a diet plan. And the diet plan we typically recommend is just to avoid foods that are high in they're pro-inflammatory. We'll say they're not high in inflammation, but they can promote inflammation, and things that we typically tell just as a blanket to avoid for a few weeks, just to try it out. Sugars, refined sugars, tend to be very inflammation inducing or promoting. Dairy, gluten, and eggs and alcohol can be ones that cause your body to go under just increased inflammation. They can kind of wreak havoc on your gut for some people. So those are the most common ones. We typically start there, and if that doesn't do the trick, we start to drill down. So I saw you, and the good thing about Nazeeg's case, and one thing I think we should highlight, is that she was extremely diligent on the things we told her to do. So if we told her to do the diet, she did it 100%. If we told her to exercise, she did it 100%. So after we do the history and our physical examination, just to rule out any red flags or any type of other stuff that might be going on from a neurological standpoint, then we move forward. The next thing we do after we provide the diet on day 2, which in this case was 1 week later, it was May 22nd. So almost 2 years to the day, May 22nd. The second thing we do is a Buffalo treadmill test. So she said that she's been told not to do any exercise whatsoever by anybody, and it's been 6 years. And she also told me that she likes to run, or at least did like to run before all of this went down. So with the diet plan and the education and basically empowering her, because we spend probably 15, 20 minutes just on education of what a concussion is, what happens inside the brain, what are the potential causes that could be contributing to the symptoms that you're experiencing. And then we kind of develop a game plan. So we're going to do this with your food. We're going to do this in terms of exercise. We're going to check for blood flow. We're going to do all this stuff. And I think that alone, with that knowledge and being given the diet, really helps people a lot. I usually find that there's about a 50% reduction in symptoms just with the education and the diet plan alone. And in Nazeeg's case, we went from a 68 symptom severity score down to a 15 in 1 week. And I hadn't touched her yet. right? It's just providing the right diet, the right recommendations, the right education to then let her say, okay, this is different. This is something I don't have to sit in a dark room. I can go out and socialize. Oh my God, that's amazing. And so when she came back to see me, now keep in mind the scores that I just said. Headache was a 2. Nauseousness was a 1. Feeling slowed down was a 1. Difficulty concentrating was a 1. Confusion, emotional, anxiety, sadness, irritability, that were all 4 out of 6, were now 0 out of 6. And the one thing she said was that the diet plan really had a profound effect right away. So she noticed even within a few days that she was starting to feel better, being diligent 100% on that diet. Pressure in the head was still a 2. Blurred vision was a 3 still. Sensitivity to noise was a 2. So, but she had a really profound effect just on that, just after that initial visit. So in the first week, she basically had her symptoms reduced by 75% from there. So then we put her on the treadmill. And do you remember being nervous for that? Were you nervous for the treadmill test?
Yeah, I remember going on that, and I just thought, I wonder if I'm going to be able to do it, because I hadn't exercised in so long, and just pushing my limits wasn't a thing. So yeah, I was kind of nervous about that one.
And you passed with flying
and
colors.
I was so surprised about it too.
You got up to a heart rate of 192, which is close to your max. And actually, I think it is your max. Yeah, it is. It's your max. And we stopped the test because you hit your max heart rate, not because you had any increase in symptoms. So no increase in symptoms whatsoever. Hit her max heart rate. So what that tells us right there is that the symptoms that she's experiencing are not due to a blood flow issue. So having her rest and do nothing is actually just going to be detrimental for her. So then we told her, all right, start exercising. You like running? Start running. And that's what she did. And then I bring her back in 2 days later. And generally the second visit is when we look at the visual system and the vestibular system in terms of balance and your ocular motor function. How do your eyes move? Do they move together well? Are they skipping? Are they moving around? She was noting that she had some blurriness and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's something I wanted to check. And then we also check the neck on that visit, and time permitted, we might even do a neck treatment depending on what we find.
This was my favorite appointment.
So I see her 2 days later. So this is May 22nd.
The 24th.
Her symptom score is 15 before the treadmill test. She passes the treadmill test. 2 days later, this would have been a Thursday just because I know my schedule. May 24th, I see her and I do her symptom score before I do anything. Her symptom score is now a 13. So she went from a 68 to a 15, now to a 13. And let's see, headache was a 2. Blurred vision was still a 3. Sensitivity to noise was still a 2. But yeah, most of the other stuff is like way, way, way down, like confusion, anxiety, sadness, all that stuff. And I think that comes a lot from just empowering the patient in terms of providing that education. So her subjective reports, she has a light headache, not too bad, and went for a nice long walk the day before, but hasn't really started in with an exercise protocol yet. And then I did her vestibular and ocular motor stuff, and we found issues with her horizontal and her vertical vestibular ocular reflex. So that's how your eyes and your inner ear and vestibular system kind of work together. So there's a reflex that when you turn your head, it tells your eyes to turn the opposite direction so that you can keep your eyes stable on a target. If that's off, sometimes it can feel like when you're walking, you're looking through a camcorder, and it can create this feeling of dizziness. And so she had issues with both her horizontal and her vertical VOR, but that was it. Everything else, and I could pull up your scores here. Yeah, nothing with her ocular motor function at all. No saccades. No issues with saccades. A little bit of visual motion, but not a significant issue. But really, it was the VOR. The VOR was an issue. So I gave her rehab for that. Just gave her some exercises to do that. And I typically don't bring people in to do rehab for that. I just teach them how to do it, and I have them go.
I still have that page. I was just going through my stuff yesterday. It's like the checkered page, and then I have got your handwriting on it. I'm actually looking at it right now. It's right there.
You know what I did recently? So I used to handwrite out the instructions every time I had a person. So I finally typed them out and just then I could just like explain it and not have to write it out because it's I don't know. Anyway. All right. So then we moved on to the neck. And remember, she had zero neck pain. Neck pain. That was a thing. But she had all those other symptoms, blurred vision and everything else. So remember, her symptom score is a 13 at this point. And so I started assessing her neck. And oftentimes what you do for neck assessment is to just push in on different muscles. And depending on where somebody's feeling their headache, you can almost pinpoint exactly where, which tissues are going to be involved. So just to kind of explain this to people that might be listening is how can your neck cause headaches or how can your neck cause dizziness? Well, your head and your neck come from the same area in development. So there's a lot of crossed wires. So when you have a lot of pain in your neck, your brain actually interprets that pain as potentially coming from your neck, but it may interpret that pain as coming from somewhere else. And this is what's called referred pain. So the most common or the most well-known example of this would be a heart attack, right? If you're having a heart attack, some people feel pain down their left arm, right? They'll have this aching left arm. Well, there's nothing wrong with your left arm, but your brain just says there's something going on over here somewhere and I don't quite know where it is. And you have more sensory fibers in your arm. And so you get these overlapping wires crossed and you start to feel as if it's pain in your arm, but it's actually your heart. And the same thing goes for your head and neck. And different muscles and different joints refer to different areas of the head. So if you have an issue with your suboccipital muscles, which are right here at the base of your skull, that can travel up over the top of the head. It can feel like a headache that's right in your forehead. So a lot of times people will be like, oh, I have this headache right in my forehead. And really what it is actually your suboccipital muscles back here. Splenius capitis muscle will cause a headache right on the very top of the head, like right on the crown of the head. People will often say it feels like somebody's driving a screwdriver right through the top of my head. So depending on where somebody, basically where people report their headache, you can figure out which muscles are going to be affected. Do you remember where your headaches were?
Yeah, I remember always on the left side, kind of like for everybody who can see it, it's right above my ear on the left side, and I could just feel the veins. And if I put my finger down, it was kind of like a cracking feel, like I could just feel all the veins there. But my headaches would come from there and then come from my neck all the way up, and I could just sometimes feel it in my eyes. I think the best way to kind of describe my headaches that I literally had every day was like a severe migraine every single day. And at one point I kind of forgot or like didn't realize where it was being sourced from, because it was just like having like a sore thumb. You just know that you've got the headache and you just walk around with it.
Yeah. And I think that's something also to keep in mind is that a lot of people will assume that it's migraine, but migraine is an actual type of headache, and people don't really realize that. People just assume that anything that's a really bad headache is a migraine headache.
Yeah.
But migraine actually has a specific kind of pathophysiological cause to it, and by definition, the criteria for migraine is it's a fairly short headache, lasting a few hours to sometimes a day or maybe 2 days. But people that have these constant headaches, I'll have patients that come in and say, I have had a migraine all week. Well, you haven't had a migraine all week because you can't have a migraine all week. If you've had a migraine all week, it's by definition not a migraine, it's something else. And because the criteria of concussion and what's called migraine and what's called a cervicogenic headache, which is a headache coming from your neck, that's kind of they're very similar in terms of what their criteria is, but one thing that differentiates them is the time frame in which they last. And so the fact that you had this constant headache tells me that, you know what, it's probably not a migraine, it's probably neck related, because that's one of the types of headache that can just have this constant dull aching for a long time. Okay, so what do we do? Your issues, let's see here. your suboccipitals. So back here on the
So sorry, just like for everybody that's from Invisible Scar Following, this is the question I always get: is what did he do to your neck, and how did you fix your jaw? So like, listen closely.
So your issue, I'm just reading my notes here. Your issue was your left side deep neck flexors. So in the front here, deep neck flexors were tight. Some postural stuff like tightness in the pecs and stuff. This is very common in students and concussion patients as well. Splenius capitis, which is one that kind of wraps around your suboccipitals and your left SCM. So your SCM is this big thick guy right here. It refers pain into the facial region. And both her left SCM and her left suboccipitals referred pain into her forehead. So I was able to recreate her forehead. So when I'm doing an assessment on a patient and they're reporting that they have a headache in a certain area, I know right away which muscles and joints I'm going to check because there's certain muscles that refer into certain areas, right? So if she's saying I have a headache right here in my forehead or in my eye, I'm immediately going to check the suboccipital muscles and I'm going to push on them. And you have to really dig in on them. You can't just kind of, like just very light. You have to really dig in. So when I dug in on that caused her headache. And she, obviously that was wincing pain. And I was like, oh, stop it, it hurts.
I actually remember that. It's like one of the pivotal moments, I think, because I remember when you assessed my neck that day and you kind of took a look around and it was only supposed to be an assessment. It was never supposed to be a treatment that day. So when you just looked and you're like, I know what's wrong with you, and I'm gonna fix it today. And I'll never forget those words because like you literally said that, and I was like, no. But then you came in with you came in with the different papers for me to sign, and I thought for 1 second, like, I don't know if I should sign. I'm alone because my sister wasn't there. But then I thought, I've got nothing to lose. I'm already in so much pain. Let's give it a try. But I remember like those, I don't know how long that is. It felt like hours when you were treating it. But I remember it being the most painful ever. Like I've never yelled in a doctor's room from pain. And I remember I yelled when you were kind of treating the neck part there. But I also remember you reminding me it's going to hurt now, but I'm going to save you from a lot of pain later. And I'll let you continue, but I remember that part happening in the process.
So we have our clinic has these treatment rooms that are in like basically frosted glass, so you can't see them, but there's no ceiling on the roof. And I frequently have patients just screaming in my room, and I'm like, man, they're just like, I guarantee my next patients are sitting out there just like, I don't want to want to go in there. I'm not going in. No. You go first, but the thing is, I wouldn't put people through that if it didn't work, right? So I'm of the opinion like, just let's get it done. Let's get in there. Let's really work it out, and it'll suck right now, but it will help. And so that's what we did. So we treated those muscles. I think I actually gave you an adjustment that day too. So I adjusted your upper neck as well with manipulation. And so symptom score was a 13 when you came in. And then this is May 24th. And then I saw you on May 29th. So 5 days later. So that would have been the following Tuesday. And your symptom score was a 5.
Yeah.
So right there, right? You have somebody that comes in with 68 in terms of symptom severity. After the first part, she's down to 15. She does a treadmill test. She's down to 13. And then we treat her neck, somebody with no neck pain, and that gets rid of most of the other ones. For those that don't know, typically anybody in just walking around in general, if you look at the average symptom score. So if I give everybody who's listening right now, if I gave you all a symptom severity score to do for concussion, the average score would be about a 7. So she comes in and she's at a 5. Technically, that is considered recovered because anything below a 7 is considered back to, normal. That's normal life, right? So anyway, so she came in at a 5. So here's where her symptoms. Headache, gone, 0. So what was your headache when we first started? Let me just go back here.
Probably like 5 or 6.
Your headache when we first started was a 3, so it wasn't too bad. But blurred vision was a 6. And emotion, all that stuff is already gone. Fogginess was a 5. Not feeling right was a 5. Okay, so let's see how we did after that first session. So she came in, she was a 5. Headache was 0. Where's fogginess? Fogginess 0. Pressure in the head 1. Neck pain now a 1 because I usually make it hurt a little bit in the neck. Blurred vision still a 3. So everything else is gone. 0. No balance issues, no dizziness, no confusion. Sensitivity to light was gone. No fogginess, difficulty remembering, drowsiness, all 0. Sensitivity to noise 0. Not feeling right or not feeling like yourself was a 0. Fatigue 0. Trouble falling asleep 0. Sadness 0. So neck pain, we got a 1. Pressure in the head, we got a 1. Blurred vision, we got a 3. And the total score is a 5. So, and I think this is the one you had your sister with you, is it?
Well, when I had on the 24th, I was alone. I think my sister came in on the 25th, the 29th. After that. Yeah. She wanted to know, what did you do to my sister?
Yeah. So we had, and I think she filmed it. Did she film it that day?
Some of the treatment she filmed because, so when we came in on the 24th, she was traveling with her MD, so she wasn't here. And I remember when I left your office that day, after your treatment, you asked me if I felt better. And I remember at that point, it kind of all felt sore. I couldn't feel pain, or I didn't know if I felt better, but it wasn't until I walked and I went into my car, that I thought, oh my God, like I don't have that pounding headache. I, for years, couldn't open up my jaw like that. Like that was a big thing for me. I used to always have to kind of move my mouth around to do that. Even moving like this was not possible without being dizzy. And one of the other things was getting up and down, like getting into my car and up was always like I could feel it's also almost like I could feel my brain moving. Like I had none of that. So I immediately got in the car and I drove all the way to Cambridge to see my parents at the time. I drove an hour after the doctor's office, and it was the day before my dad's 70th birthday. And I just remember everybody at my house being so emotional and so happy about it. And at first, I mean, I had my worries of like, okay, is this just for the day or is this going to get better? But something inside me after that day was just like, no, I literally just got better. I remember May 24th as being kind of like one of those pivotal moments of my life. And obviously the joy was very vivid in my face, and had my parents and sister constantly supporting me through it too. So I remember my sister came along with me to the following appointment, took videos to show my parents, like, this is what the doctor did.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me emotional, like hearing that, you know what I mean? Because it's one of those things where it's like, I'm just going about my day, right? Like I don't realize what type of effect that can have on somebody. But I do frequently get that report that people feel really disoriented, you know, when they leave, you know, after the first one, they feel really kind of messed up because your neck tells your brain so much about where you are in space, right? It interacts with your eyes and it interacts with your vestibular system. And so oftentimes when you really get in there and work on that stuff, it's like you have a brand new neck and your brain tries to try and figure it all out. So you get up from this and you're just like, patients will often look at me and go, I feel really weird. And I'm like, it's okay. Like it'll pass. Right. And usually I get the report that by the time they hit their car, which is like, we're in this big, it's like a 4-pad arena with, you know, so it's a big building and usually people park on the other side of it. So by the time they make that walk and get out there, it's usually that's when I get the report that like I just got in my car and just cried because I actually felt good. And I've heard that from a number of people. That's
exactly what happened.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. See, I just went into my car and started crying, and it was like tears of joy. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that from a lot of people actually. That's what, so you will feel disoriented when you do it. But again, this is different than just going to like a typical chiro that's just going to adjust, right? Like there's soft tissue treatments in here. Like I do a lot of ART, I do a lot of acupuncture on certain muscles to try and get them to relax, because if you're not working on the tissues as well, you're going to completely miss the point, and you're going to assume that, chiro is not, beneficial for you. Like you'd already been to chiropractors before.
Yeah, you would have been the fourth one.
Right. And so
yeah.
you have to go see the right one, I guess, or somebody that kind of knows what they're doing and how these things work. And based on a pretty simple assessment, you can figure out what tissues are involved, right? And you can just get in there and work on them, and you're going to have a really profound effect. And so she was down to a 5, and this was on May 29th. And then we treated her again. So I basically just did it again. So our subjective notes: feeling quite great. Felt improvement right after last treatment. Neck is a little bit sore, but otherwise feels good. Was able to go out on the weekend, went for a bike ride, hung out with friends, didn't have to nap at all. This is her report on the 29th. Feeling great. So then I basically just did the same thing. I worked on her pecs. I worked a little bit in her armpit and her subscapularis muscle, up on her traps, her SCM, the sternocleidomastoid. I worked on the deep neck flexors in the front, and then I worked on her left suboccipitals, these guys back here that refer pain over the top. And then I adjusted those upper joints again, and I actually worked into your thoracic spine a little bit, did some adjustments in your T-spine. And I did some acupuncture on your SCM on the left side. And I also put some acupuncture needles in your left suboccipital. Okay. So that was on May 29th. So then I see you, this would have been 1 week later, June 5th.
Yeah. I think the discharge date was just a couple weeks after that.
Yeah. So June 5th, I saw you, and your symptom score had gone up a little bit. So it was a 7. Headache was now a 1. So sometimes this can happen, right? So you treat something, push on some stuff, and the headache can come back. Anyway, so your headache was a 1. Difficulty concentrating was a 1, which is common. If you have a headache, it's hard to concentrate. Neck pain was now a 2. And then basically, here's what her subjective notes were. Still feeling good. Neck is a bit tight. Notice over the weekend, she had some pudding and immediately flared up her headache. So it could be related to sugars, right? Because at this point, she had taken that out of her diet and was being very diligent on the diet, but feeling good, decides, you know what, I'm going to have a little bit of sugar, had some pudding, noticed right away that flared her headache up. So this is how important it is to kind of look at this more holistically, right? You can't just go at it from one area and say, oh, vestibular, I'm going to do vestibular rehab and think that that's going to work, right? There's more to it than that, and it's a very holistic thing, right? You got inflammation, you got potentially neck issues, you got vision issues, you got vestibular issues, but it's all together. So anyway, I basically treated her one more time. So this was on June 5th, and the score was a 7. So technically still normal, but it had gone up a little bit from before. And then the final visit was actually a couple of weeks later, 2 weeks after that. So I let you go for a couple of weeks and just said, okay, just be diligent on the diet, exercise, and away you go. And then I saw you June 21st, and your symptom score was back down to a 4. Headache was 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Pressure in the head was a 1. Neck pain was still a 1. Blurred vision was still a 2. And basically you were back down to normal. So we were just saying, okay, make sure there's nothing wrong with your eyes. I treated your neck one more time and basically gave you the all clear and just said, if you need me for anything, come back. So since then, I see you maybe once every 6 to 8 weeks, you just come in and, your neck gets a little bit tight and stuff like that. But other than that, concussion symptoms all gone. You haven't really had any relapses or anything since then.
No.
Just every so often you have a little bit of neck pain. So that's it. That was your case. So that's 6 years. Let me look at the total recovery time now. Total recovery time was 2,165 days. And the total treatment duration for us was between May 15th and the discharge date was June 21st, so just over a month. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 visits, but 2 of those were assessment visits. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love hearing that story because I always think about it of how for 6 years was so long, and how quickly the treatment was available. And I often talk about that too, because I had almost been closed off to getting any more treatment. And it's not, I guess you just don't know when you're going to find the right care for everybody. And I think the care exists there. So share my story now very openly. And I think just to kind of be like a source of hope or inspire that it does get better, as long as you find the proper care. But I think one of the things that you highlighted too, and it was how diligently it was to follow the procedures. I mean, the chiropractics and everything you did had such a big impact. The diet portion of it, I think, was equally important, as well as the exercise, and that was encouraged and advocated by yourself. And I think that often, I remember asking a family physician like 3 years in, like, oh, what do you think about me going and just doing like plant-based or eating more raw foods? And said, oh, don't waste your time with that. Just take a couple of Advils, and diet doesn't really do a lot. I think that's the difference between the different kinds of medical care you can seek. For me, and I sometimes talk about it on my lives about the diet portion, and I always hear the feedback of that's so hard, that's so many, there's so many things that you can't eat. But I always like go back to what my mom said to me after I visited you, and she said, well, this is kind of a small sacrifice you have to do for the investment of what you'll get out of it after. And those words couldn't be any more true. I think a lot of it is there. It has a lot of sacrifice. It takes a bit of discipline. Sometimes it's more difficult than it seems, but at the end of the day, the recovery is a commitment too. It's very easy to say, why me, and sit in a room and just say, I can't do so many things. But I think it's very important to follow through and keep looking for answers, or if you're told to do something, to kind of stay committed to it and keep going with it.
Yeah, I think that's what I notice the difference in patients that I see that get better and those that don't is like, the ones that aren't getting better and the ones that are kind of dragging along. I'm like, okay, well, you following the diet? Well, yeah, mostly I am. And then right away they're full of shit and they're not. And then that it's just, they're not going to get better,
Yeah.
right? They're just not following the instruction. That's like going to the doctor and having an infection and the doctor writing a prescription and saying, okay, you need to take this antibiotic. And then just saying, I'm not going to take the antibiotic, but then actually being upset that you still have the infection, even though you never took the medication that was prescribed to you, right? So I think that's the thing. It's people got to look at this like, this is your prescription. This is your medication. I want you exercising every day. I want you eating this way. I want you doing your rehab. I want you doing your exercises. Because if you're not going to do it, like, why are you wasting my time? Why are you wasting your own time? It's obviously you don't want to get better. Those that want to get better. They just have to follow the rules and the instructions to do it. Those that don't and want to just complain about it, they'll have issues.
There's always going to be a lot of excuses. That's like excuses versus reason. I actually just wanted to add another part too about the exercise. I remember you always encouraging it and saying, well, just go for a 5-minute walk and build on your increments. And I was always into running and soccer. And for the longest time, I found that it was very hard to even do the running. It wasn't until after the treatment where I felt like I didn't really feel that bump in my head while I was running. It always felt like I could feel it that way. But I think post-recovery and post-concussion, I often think that one of the struggles through the concussion was I always compared myself to how I was before. But it's important to also see that there's a lot of learnings that come out of it. And sometimes you become kind of not a different person, but you grow through the experience. And I think it kind of gave me an opportunity to test and try new things. So after concussion, I started doing yoga. And I did hot yoga. I remember asking you if that was a proper choice or proper for recovery. And it ended up being hot yoga. So it was very good for the inflammation part of it. It really helped mitigate that. And I started off by going to 1-hour classes, and I was probably only active for the first 10 to 15 classes, but by the end of that year, I was doing 60-minute, 90-minute classes. Sometimes I even did two classes in one day. I mean, obviously I had to build a tolerance for that, but it goes to show that it's possible. I mean, for 6 years, I was told to lie down and wait until the symptoms got better. And then all of a sudden, I was able to do quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point for people to keep in mind is that you can't go from zero to what you used to do, right? Like people say, well,
Yeah.
I used to run marathons and, but then they'll try to go run and they'll start with a 10K. And it's like, no, 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 you
Yeah.
gotta come back to basics and pretend you've never run before, because basically you get deconditioned and just, completely out of shape, and you have to build up that tolerance again. But the symptoms of having a really hard workout, you'll start to feel dizzy, you'll start to feel really messed up even without a concussion, right? But you throw a
Yeah.
concussion in the mix, people think that they've flared up their concussion, but really they're just out of shape and they've pushed themselves beyond that. So they'll start to have a headache, they'll start to feel dizzy, they'll start to feel lightheaded, whatever. So it's just, you have to realize that there's a lot of overlap between the symptoms of this. Did you have any other questions in terms of, I know that you had some questions that have come from people just in terms of specifics on certain things, that you want to cover?
Yeah, so I think one of the questions that would be nice is I've got a lot of followers that are in the Europe time zone, so I'm hoping that they tuned in now, but a lot of them don't have access to here. Is there anything they can do from their house now to kind of start to treat stuff? I mean, I always advocate for the anti-inflammatory diet and kind of easing their way into exercise, but maybe you could kind of speak to that, or if there's any kind of educational resources that you could lead them to.
Yeah, I think that um, there's it's tough because everyone's kind of different, right? So I kind of tend to go with a blanket approach and try to think of things more holistically. If you have a really good concussion clinician in your community, then that's probably the best to have somebody to guide it through. But we know that not everyone has that, and so and actually, I've actually had, I think I've for the past 3 or 4 sessions we've been kind of teasing this out, but we have a course that we've designed specifically for patients that we're launching actually next week. So 1 week today. So that if you're listening to this on the podcast or watching this on YouTube, then there's a good chance it's already released. And we're actually launching it through concussiondoc.io, which is my new site. And so the course, actually, we have Dr. Paul Herkel on it, who's a naturopath. He does all of our diet stuff for all of our concussion patients. So the exact diet that you were following will be kind of included in that. But just trying to give patients the tools that they can use, because we know that not everyone has access to this. And other things that we're including in there, we have a psychotherapist who's talking about just basically the entire mindset you need for recovery, talking about meditation, talking about exercise. We teach people how to start exercising after their concussion, how to eat properly, how to do some neck rehab for yourself, what types of vestibular and visual exercises, how can you kind of assess yourself and then do the exercise. So I think that really step one is, if you can find somebody in your community who's a really good concussion clinician, then I would start there. If you can't, you can check out our course or other online resources. I think that we're probably the only course online right now for concussion, for specifically for patients. We usually teach the healthcare professionals, but we realize that there's a lot of people still that we can't help unless we educate them directly. So all the same education that we gave you in your thing when you were first starting to see me, that's all included in there. We go through what are the main causes of persistent symptoms and what you can do to kind of tackle each one on your own. So I think that it's not going to be the be all end all for everybody, but I think that we're probably going to be able to help probably 85% of patients get rid of their symptoms just through an online education course, which I think is going to be pretty crazy. But yeah, that's kind of my recommendation. Oh, we're running out of time. We only have 2 minutes. Instagram Live kicks you off after an hour.
Ah, okay.
Um, any other questions specifically about?
I did think kind of you've really gone through it in detail, and I think that kind of answers it for a lot of the inquiries that I've been getting. I mean, I don't have a medical or scientific background, so it's really good to hear that, and I hope that it does benefit everybody. I was very closed off with my experience when I was going through a concussion. I feel like being open about it now has helped a lot more people, and it's doing good. So I will continue to do that and share that content on my page. I'm very, I always say this, and I know this, I'm very grateful for your commitment to concussions and for the care that I received that really did shift lives. And I think you're so used to doing it all the time, but it does have a very big impact on people's lives. I mean, since then, I've been able to do so much, and a lot of the goals and dreams, aspirations that I had, that I thought I'd never do, I'm living them now. So, and I'm grateful for that.
let's just go through those goals real quick. We have 48 seconds left, it says, but basically when you first came to see me, you had finished undergrad by this point, but since then now you did an MBA, right?
That's correct. I'll be finishing up in a few months.
Right. And you started a side business, right? And you're still
I have a side business, and I was able to kind of push it up a little bit more and put more time into it. Yeah. I'm working in corporate strategy as my full time. I've got the blog going on the side, and just be able to be more active and fill my time with activities and socializing. I mean, with limitations now with COVID, I've been able to. I just feel like I've got the wealth of time now. It's no more limitations. Oh, we're off of Instagram.
No, I think that's, I mean, we don't need Instagram necessarily, but
a change in life.
No, that's awesome. Just because like going from that into like something and you're working full time, you're doing an MBA, you're doing, and you have your own business. I think that's a lot for anybody to juggle. And especially being able to do that now, given the past 6 years has been, brutal. I think that's a huge testament for what is possible. So,
yes,
sweet.
Pushing limits, and we're going to keep moving forward. So thank you.
That's right. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today and kind of sharing your story with everyone and allowing me to get into your medical record a little bit. I know that, some people wouldn't feel comfortable with that, but it's so great that you're open and sharing your story. So again, appreciate it. And, we'll end it there. Do you have any final words, final thoughts?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right on. See you later. Whoa, wait. Just one more thing before you go. This episode is brought to you by the Complete Concussion Management Clinical Network. Are you suffering from concussion symptoms that just aren't getting better? Maybe you're in the wrong place. Maybe you're seeing the wrong healthcare professional. Visit CompleteConcussion.com/find-a-clinic to find all the local professionally trained concussion rehab individuals in your area. Each of our partnered clinics have gone through extensive training on concussion assessment, management, diagnosis, treatment, and rehabilitation. They're going to work with you to try and find the root cause of your symptoms and then develop a treatment plan and approach to help get rid of them. If you don't know what's driving the symptoms, you can't ever help or hope to fix them. CompleteConcussion.com/find-a-clinic. They have a 98% patient satisfaction rating and have a higher net promoter score than Amazon, Apple, and Netflix. CompleteConcussions.com/find-a-clinic. You will not regret it.